It's time for the Postmortem Report with your hosts Ronald McGilray and Michael Schotter. Each month, these sultans of speculative fiction take a break from bending reality to ask one burning question. What cool stuff got buried in the social media graveyard while people were busy yelling at each other? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let's dig into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Postmortem Report. I'm your co-host, Michael Schotter.
And I'm Ronald McGilvray. Welcome to Episode 7, the Valentine's Day Guilty Pleasures Edition.
Ooh, spicy.
Yes. Ready to get saucy?
Yeah, we were definitely ready to make it happen. And fortunately, for those who aren't in a festive romantic relationship, there's also other festive happy things to celebrate this month. So why don't we throw some of those out there and give people something to cheer about if they happen to be in the Lonely Hearts Club.
All right. Well, we have some birthdays. First birthday to Duncan Ralston, December 1st, author of Ghostland and Womb. Happy birthday to Duncan. You can actually get 7 free ebooks from him right now if you sign up for his duncanralston.com webpage. So
excellent.
7 free books for our 7th episode.
It's almost like he planned that.
Yeah, I know. Happy birthday to Ramsey Campbell, December 5th, author of Burn to the Dark. Actually, there's a review of Burn to the Dark on John C. Adams' reviews website. So check that one out. Happy birthday to Ramsey. Grady Hendrix has a birthday, December 14th. Author of How to Sell a Haunted House. He has a funny post. He's obviously an OG gamer. He was playing Haunted House on the Atari system. So, way to go, Grady.
Him to some Pong.
That's it. Jeff Strand, his birthday, December 14th. He has a new novelization coming out of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. That classic. He's bringing it back to life. So happy birthday to Jeff. Yeah. Jeremy Hepler, his birthday, December 16th. Author of Sun Realis. Happy birthday to Jeremy. Richard Chizmar, birthday is December 21st. His book that he worked with Stephen King on, Gwendy's Final Task, made it to the final round of the Goodreads Choice Awards. So congratulations and happy birthday to Richard.
Very nice.
Frank Edler, his birthday, December 22nd. Happy birthday to Frank, author of Reggie Rat's birthday for, Reggie Rat's Birthday Fun Center and Same-Day Outpatient Care Facility. That was quite a mouthful.
Congratulations on getting that title out.
That's it. So happy birthday, Frank. And happy birthday to Phillip Fracassi, December 31st. His book, A Child Alone with Strangers, was a best horror book choice of 2022 by Esquire. So congratulations to Philip and happy birthday to him. And that's our birthday file for this month.
Very nice. Very, very nice. Well, one of the things that we do here on the show is we employ a little bit of treachery from time to time to make sure we get all these episodes to you folks in a timely fashion. And so one of the things we do is we record a little bit in advance of when you guys are seeing these things. And so given the time of year that it actually is while we're recording this, we wanted to do something a little more chilled out, a little more mellow and tranquil. And so that's where this whole idea of the Guilty Pleasures episode came from. And, guilty pleasures, that can mean different things to different people. That could be something that's generally considered to be not so great that you love anyway. That could be something that maybe is a little outside the norm of what you'd usually engage in, and that's something that people might be a little surprised to find that you're into. And I think we have a pretty good cross section of things to talk about that kind of cover a bunch of different bases. But the way I wanted to kick things off was with something that I know you and I are both pretty big fans of, despite it not being particularly beloved. I'm going to just throw it out there. I know I might take some lumps from the internet for this, but I am actually a pretty big fan and very much enjoy Cell by Stephen King.
As do I.
Yeah,
As
so
do
this
I.
I was really surprised when I found out kind of just how much sort of negative buzz there is around that book online. Because right, like even when you go and look at like the Goodreads page or some of the Goodreads reviews and stuff like that for that book, it seems like it takes quite a beating from like critics and fans alike in a lot of cases. And I honestly don't understand why, because I actually think it's one of King's better, like more recent books. I guess recent is a relative term, right? Because his
Yeah.
career is so
Yeah.
long. But yeah, that was one of those books where it really surprised me to find that not a lot of people seem to really dig it the way that I did when I read it.
Yeah.
Um,
It probably had a lot to do with it was just because dealing with kind of like a zombie thing and it had been done so many times.
mhm.
And I mean, he didn't really breathe a lot of new life into the zombie thing. I mean, he had sort of the frequency thing that was going as the angle, but I think a lot of people were
Mhm.
just judging him on that instead of it was a fun story, it was a
Yeah,
good read, but they were just like, oh well, zombies have been overdone, and he was just
yeah.
jumping on the bandwagon. So it was unfair, I thought.
Yeah, I think that book gets a bad rap, honestly, because I think sure it is very tropey for sure. It's a very tropey book, but at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's like a well executed, well told story with like interesting characters and interesting little like plot devices and mechanisms and stuff like that. Like, sure. And I think maybe the other thing that it suffers from, right, is like this is the same guy who wrote like The Stand, right? So it's
Yeah,
like that whole post-apocalyptic, opus is going to kind of loom large over anything else, you're going to do that's even vaguely similar. And I definitely get that, but I always feel like Cell gets knocked around a little bit. I would like to see that book get a little more love than it does, because I definitely found it really enjoyable and like a really satisfying, like fun, quick read. And I don't know, maybe it was just the state of mind I was in or like the mindset I had when I read it, but I was just very like receptive to it and like ended up enjoying it quite a bit. So I was like I just get a little sad whenever I see it like taking lumps out there on the internet. So I guess that would be a guilty pleasure for me, reading wise. But I know you had one that you were going to talk about that actually rang some bells for me when you mentioned it. I wonder how many other people it will do the same for.
well, it was something out of the norm that I normally read, but it was something from my past. Dave Barry, he's a syndicated columnist with Miami Herald, or he was. Um, I used to read it in our local newspaper. We used to have this funny column. So I looked more into it, and he had these books out, and I started buying the books, which were a collection of his syndicated columns. And he has this really quirky humor to it. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. Actually, I have this book. Let's do a plug for Dave Barry.
Nice.
There's Dave Barry there. So if you don't have, there's his greatest hits book. So you
Very
can
nice.
get all his columns there. I mean, they're really short. I mean, you got like it's like 3 page column. Some of them are a bit longer, but they're just short, 3 or 4 pages. So that's like you can sit down and just kind of laugh. If you have a second, you're waiting for something. Um, it just yeah, it's I read them when I was a youngster, and I have continued to read him. He's still putting books out. I follow him on social media, and he's just as funny as he was. So if you like sort of
Yeah,
I don't know what I was going
how
to
would
say.
you even categorize his brand of humor? Like I kind of
Childish.
remember it, yeah, being sort of snarky at times a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It just hit my funny bone. He was just, I don't know,
Yeah.
right time, right place when I started reading it, and I just continued to read David Barry. I think too, I just liked it because it was such a short column,
Hmm.
anywhere from like 2 pages to 5 pages. So
Yeah, those are always nice little bite-sized things to ingest.
yeah, so he's my guilty pleasure.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw one out there in terms of like the whole like things you wouldn't typically read or things that people might not think you would typically read. So, and this is definitely not short, which is the Orion series by Ben Bova, um, which is a actually pretty famous science fiction series from like the 80s and 90s, which follows this fella who's basically for lack of a better term, an immortal. And
Okay,
basically the whole gist of it, or like the whole gimmick of it, is he's basically got control over like literally every cell of his body, right? He's got these abilities that come about as a result of him being basically bred to be like a super soldier. And an easy example of that, right, is like right at the beginning of the first book. He talks about like how he learned how to play the piano in a matter of days, and like the guy who was teaching him how to play was like, completely incredulous, and
yeah,
didn't believe that he had never touched a keyboard before. And so there's all these things that he can do as a result of having this like fine, control over or every aspect of his being. And that's sort of like the setup and the framework for it. And then it kind of goes like into these really wild off the wall places. Like there's a lot of time travel elements to it and a lot of theological elements and stuff like that, which like I know I've mentioned before that like time travel is not really my jam when it comes
yeah,
to like science fiction, but for whatever reason those Bova books kind of work for me. It's like I guess there's two things, right? Like one of them is that they kind of remind me of like Conan in space, so in much
okay,
the same way that I have like an affection for like Conan the Barbarian. I feel
yeah,
like there's that same kind of vibe that those Orion books put off. And again, along similar lines, like they're kind of written in the style of science fiction from an earlier era. So they almost read like something from the 50s or 60s or 70s, even though they were written in the 80s and 90s. And that I always kind of have like a soft spot for that like golden era and silver era, like science fiction. So like,
so it's
even
kind of like
though
pulpy.
yeah, they're like almost like a little bit pulpy,
Okay,
but like oddly cerebral in spots too, right? And
okay,
I think that's like kind of a hallmark of like the classics in science fiction as well. When you talk about like Heinlein and Clarke and Asimov and all those like pillars of the science fiction writing world, like a lot of their stuff kind of alternates between like almost juvenile, like pulpy content and like really
yeah,
hardcore, super cerebral, sciency content.
yeah,
And I think Bova was another author who really kind of captured that style and that essence. I think that's one of the reasons why he was so popular in like the 80s and 90s and why he resonated with so many people. It's because he kind of was almost like a throwback to that old school style of writing,
yeah,
while still, obviously having his own voice and stuff. Like obviously he's a super prolific, super beloved author, but like depending on who you talk to and depending on which series of his that they've read, I feel like people have
yeah.
like very different ideas about like kind of who he is or like what his best books are and all that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I would say that the Orion series is kind of like a guilty pleasure for me, despite it being super popular. It's just something that people might not think I would be into, but actually am.
Yeah. How many books are in the series? Is it like a big series?
So when I had read it, the last book was Orion Among the Stars, which was the fifth book, which is actually probably my
Okay.
favorite, for reasons that I won't spoil.
Yeah.
But then I believe there was actually another one published in 2011, which I haven't read, which I'm probably actually going to circle back and check out at some point. that actually has to do with sort of his interpretation of the Arthurian legends. So like
Okay.
King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table type
Yeah.
stuff, which I thought might be an interesting thing. Because like, one of the books he goes back into like medieval times. One of the books he's in like Roman times. Another book he's in like the end of the Cretaceous period. So there's like dinosaurs and stuff running around. Like
Yeah.
those books are kind of all over the place with like the time travel stuff
Hmm.
and the sort of fanciful, more like fantastical elements.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me at all that there's a King Arthur book in that series, and I haven't read it, so I can't really speak to the quality of it. But
Yeah.
I think he wrote it like literally like 15 or 20 years after Orion Among the Stars, so I bet it's tonally pretty different, right? Because he was definitely in a different place as a writer by that point. So I am kind of curious to check it out and see how well it fits in or contrasts with those previous books.
Well, Christmas is a good time to do it.
Yeah, might not be
Get
a
some
bad
time.
idea. That would definitely be a guilty pleasure. That would be something that would
Yeah.
take me way off the rails of what I've
There
typically been reading lately. So who knows? That might be my next pickup.
you go.
uh but yeah, Bova's a good one though. He's definitely one who I think who's sadly fallen off the radar a little bit since his death. So I definitely like encourage people to check him out if you haven't. Like I feel like he's one of those sci-fi authors who was definitely like a pillar of the sci-fi community for a really long time, who you don't really hear mentioned as much these days, which is unfortunate. So if nothing else, good to shout him out for that. Um,
If you want to
but
read something lighter, check out Dave Barry. It's only a couple
nice,
pages. You don't have to get into a whole series of books. Just pick it up, read
nice.
it, and you're done.
Once again, providing a nice range of contrasting options for the people. I love it.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of contrasting options, let's shift from books to movies and talk about one of my favorite guilty pleasure movies, which kind of is almost like a trifecta here because I think we've talked about stuff from the Alien franchise like 3 episodes in a row now, but I don't care because I can't get enough xenomorphs.
There you go.
Uh, let's talk about Alien 3, which is definitely, I think, the dark horse of the original three Alien movies to a lot of people, but I definitely would consider that a guilty pleasure of mine and a movie that I really thoroughly enjoy despite its flaws.
So you're into prison movies.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny, right? Because the whole prison colony motif of that movie is almost kind of silly, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like this whole premise is like, okay, we're going to send these people off to a penal colony to work at a lead works where nothing works. And they're basically like literally out in the middle of nowhere doing nothing but serving hard time, basically. And wouldn't you know it, you know, uh, good old Ellen Ripley's escape pod lands on their prison colony and mayhem ensues as a result. But
Just when
yeah, I
life couldn't
mean,
get any worse for them.
yeah, like, well, so I think there's a few things about that movie, right? One of which is it's definitely a product of its time, right? Like
Yeah.
that movie just oozes 90s angst and despair like no other, except for perhaps the movie that followed it, but we'll get to that later maybe. But the thing with Alien 3 is like I'm very aware of all the flaws that movie has, but there's so many like iconic scenes and moments and little like just great bits of acting that would almost be like completely lost if not for the fact that they were wrapped up in this franchise movie
Yeah.
that I always feel like compelled to give credit to. Like I always remember like Charles Dutton when he's trying to like get the other prisoners in line and he's got the big lead pipe and he's like pumping it in his hand. He's like, I gotta re-educate the brothers.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, man, take it to them. Get those boys in line.
It was very dark too. Like the way that the prison, everything was just dark and gloomy, and it was just like the first movie. It's like everything's dripping. Like in space, apparently there's lots of condensation.
Yes, many leaking pipes, many condensating pipes everywhere, just grossness
Yeah,
everywhere
yeah,
as far
yeah,
as the eye can see.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's
But
aliens.
yeah, and then the other kind of cool thing about that movie, I would say, is you've got the unique xenomorph, mating with the dog instead of a human, right? Which kind of creates a different alien than you've seen previously.
Yeah,
And it's like running along the ceiling and running along the walls and doing all this crazy stuff. And it had like kind of a cool, unique look to it, right? Where it was like still very recognizable as being like, from that genus or that genome, but it was kind of like really, I think a thing that people forget about that movie is that it really did introduce the idea of, oh, the alien just doesn't have to have a human host, it can have any host and change as a result of what host it has. And that really sets up a lot of things that end up getting referenced in the later movies, especially like the Prometheus and the Alien Covenant and all that, which,
yeah.
despite not being huge fan of those movies, like they're still part of the canon. So it's interesting stuff nonetheless. Um, but yeah, I think Alien 3 gets a bad rap. I think that movie is actually a lot better than people give it credit for a lot of the time. And it's definitely one that I've watched many times over the years and thoroughly enjoyed, and I will stand by that.
Well, if you've got like a xenomorph chasing anybody, it's going to be a good movie, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, right.
They're just the creepiest alien ever.
Why am I running around here in this dark effing maze? Oh wait, this was her idea. Love that.
Yeah.
But I know you've got a movie that you're pretty fond of that falls into the guilty pleasure category.
Yeah. No aliens in it, though. My
Once
pick
again,
is,
contrast.
yeah, is Young Guns.
Oh yeah, pew pew
That's
pew.
Pew pew pew. Yeah, love that movie. I don't even can't even count how many times I've watched, Young Guns and Young Guns 2. It was just I don't know. It's one of those fun guilty pleasures. A lot of action, a lot of cool actors. I mean, they had Emilio Estevez was in it.
A lot of Brat
Charlie
Packers in
Sheen.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Lou Diamond Phillip, Kiefer Sutherland. uh, the whole idea that they're, you know, and they're fighting the good fight too at the beginning. Like it was like
Hmm.
they were put upon by evil people, and they took up the guns, and to have them, you know, doing the stuff they did with all the action, but being sort of, well, not the law wasn't always behind them, but the righteousness was behind them, made
Hmm.
it kind of a fun movie.
I
Cool
like a good
soundtrack.
feel good movie like that, right? Where it's like
Yeah,
a movie that, like, even if it's sort of bending the rules of like history or whatever, or plausibility or whatever a little bit, it's all in good fun. It's
yeah,
all for like a good end or purpose. I
yeah.
can kind of get on board with that.
Yeah, and Emilio Estevez, he was funny. He brought like humor to it, to
Hmm.
Billy the Kid. He did a really good job with it. So yeah, I really liked it. As I said, I can't even count how many times I've watched it.
Yeah, I know a lot of people like to diss those movies, but I'm
Yeah,
definitely a fan as well. I think they're super fun and super entertaining, and like definitely like a good, just like, I don't know, just kind of go along for the ride and have a good time sort of experience. I'm especially fond of the second one, which I don't know
yeah,
what that says about me, but I'm gonna
yeah.
own it. Because like I love Jack Palance as the villain in that second one. I think he's such a good, like, just perfect, almost perfect villain in that movie. And there's so many like memorable moments from that one that always stick with me, like especially like the standoff, like scene at the end where they're in the house, and like how all
Yeah.
that plays out, which I won't delve too deeply into it in case anybody wants to go experience it for themselves. But like there's
Fun.
some great stuff there.
Yeah, it was because they brought it, Christian Slater was in that one, I think, the second one.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think
he played. Uh, oh, name's right at the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of the character he played. But
hmm.
anyways, but yeah, but it's
Yeah, it's
neat too because they all played people who were real life at one time.
mhm.
They were all real people.
Yeah.
Um,
And again, taking a lot of like artistic liberties, with that stuff. Especially if you really delve into the actual history of those people,
yeah,
it's definitely like they're walking a fine line there with a lot of that stuff, but it is cool. It's a
yeah,
cool. I almost think of it like as like an alternate history or an alternate dimension kind of take on it. And it's like,
yeah,
what would have been like if these people had been a little bit different or circumstances had been a little different than they had been in reality. And in that way, you could almost argue that Young Guns is sort of a speculative fiction thing, you
yeah.
know.
Well, I
Uh,
read an article that said it was actually one of the closest uh, true to life parts of
mhm.
the whole regulator gang, like how it really started, all the right people were in it, and what actually happened in it. Because you got to remember, even back then, these dime store novelists and journalists that were writing, they made
Mhm.
stuff up. They
Sure.
made these people to sell their newspapers big stories. So
Mhm.
you never knew what was really real, because even back then they were just making stuff up.
Mhm.
About Billy the Kid or Jesse James or any of them, just to hit circulation numbers.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I mean, like a lot of history nowadays is forensic history, right? It's all about like piecing together what's actually real versus what was in textbooks for 50
Yeah,
years.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
now everything's videotaped, so it's like, well, no, that
Hmm.
didn't happen because here's a videotape of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Although
so
with deep fakes and all that stuff uh, creeping up,
yeah,
uh,
good point.
yeah, things are about to get sketchy on that front too. But
Oh,
eh, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
exactly. So if you're having a problem around town, call the young guns and the regulators. They'll come help
Nice.
you out.
Mount up.
Yeah, that's it. So there's my
Love it.
guilty pleasure.
Well, while you're watching Young Guns, you might be watching it on TV because I don't think there are many theaters showing it at this point.
No,
And
not anymore.
that kind of leads us nicely into talking about maybe some guilty pleasure TV shows. What do you got for us on that front?
Well, especially coming towards Christmas, I spend a lot of time watching this show. My guilty pleasure for TV is Diners, Drive-In, and Dies with Guy
Hmm.
Fieri. I I watch a lot of Food Network stuff over Christmas while I stuff my face with food, eggnog, alcoholic beverages. But outside of the holidays, where I watch a bunch of different ones, that one I watch. I love when he goes to these restaurants and samples of food, and you see the recipes and the different foods that are specialized in different places, and he goes all across the country. So it's
Hmm.
like, this is what the specialty is in Hawaii, this is a specialty in California,
Hmm.
and New Jersey, Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
Miami. So, and it's a lot of interesting stuff. Then I go, oh, I wonder if we have anything like that here in Ottawa, which we generally
Hmm.
don't. But
Does that
it's
just lead to disappointment?
yeah, yeah. So I live vicariously through them, but sometimes I'll go, I wonder if I could try to make my own version of that. But
Nice.
yeah, it's yeah. I mean, just thinking about it when I watch it, I'm always, I get hungry watching the show. It's
Hmm.
just he's always got these great burgers and or sandwiches, these rib places and stuff.
Oh
Uh,
man, now I'm getting hungry.
yeah, yeah. It just, I don't know. I just like, when I jump down on the couch and I'm just like flicking around the TV, going, oh, I'm gonna watch something. I go to the Food Network. I wonder if like Triple D's on. And
Yeah.
click down and go, all right, and they usually have it on where it's like 3 or 4 episodes in a row.
Yeah. Just
So
feeding the addiction.
yeah. So
Nice.
I'll just sit there and then I just zone out and watch those. And yeah, love
I
me
feel
some
like
Triple D.
there's a lot of those food shows that definitely, and a lot of like the food YouTubers and stuff like that definitely fall into that like wheelhouse of like just the guilty pleasure. Like I'm just gonna sit here and watch people make and consume large quantities of food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I think like a man versus food or something like that. Even
Yeah.
uh,
Well, who
crazy
doesn't
stuff
like
like that.
food? Who doesn't like
Yeah,
food? So
people
it's easy to
not
love.
many people who survive long don't
Exactly.
like food because
Yeah.
I mean it's kind of necessary.
Yes, I would say so. Although if you ate a lot of the stuff that was on Diners, Driving, and Dives, you probably wouldn't last long either.
Yeah, though that is a good point. That is a
Yeah.
good point.
But it sure looks tasty.
Well, speaking of things that could rapidly bring an end to your existence, I'm going to talk about my guilty TV pleasure, which we're going to go way back to the vault on this one. I'm going to talk
I
about one of
can't
my
wait.
favorite shows from my childhood, which is Airwolf. Uh,
Airwolf.
do you remember this show from back in the day? This
Yes.
was during the height of the whole like superhero with a super vehicle television craze that kind of kicked off with things like Knight Rider and Blue Thunder and Street Hawk and shows of that sort. But this was basically the whole idea was it was this guy who had been a test pilot for the government for a prototype helicopter that could like disguise itself and blend in and look like a regular helicopter. And then you bloop, 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 hit some buttons and out pop the guns and out pop the missile launchers and everything goes bananas. And
It's like an early Transformers.
yeah, almost kind of like, yeah, like playing in that Transformers universe a little bit too.
Uh,
Um, but I think the thing that always attracted me to that show that I found like super fun about it was just literally any problem can be solved with an attack helicopter. And that was my big takeaway and my big life lesson that I
yeah.
really got from that show. But you know, in all seriousness, I actually watched it not too long ago because I had like I broke down and got the DVDs and stuff and maybe watched the entire series just as like a guilty pleasure thing maybe about 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and I was actually kind of surprised at how well it held up,
Okay.
even like by today's standards, because you almost forget like that was a really big budget show at the time. Like they were spending, I remember reading somewhere they spent like millions of dollars per episode on that show when it was new, which was something
Yeah.
else for like the 80s, right? That was
Yeah.
like a big budget for back then. And yeah, it was surprising to me, like a lot of the acting, a lot of the plot lines, a lot of like the concepts and stuff were like not all that crazy, even like looking back on them. So yeah, I would cautiously, tentatively still recommend that show to people if you like good like throwback period piece, like Cold War techno thriller kind of stuff. Like there's something there. There's still something there with that one. I'd
How many seasons was it?
so they did three
Okay.
originally when it was on prime time, like network television,
Yeah.
and then a cable network here in the U.S. called the USA Network, ironically, picked it up for a fourth episode or
Okay.
a fourth season, which was like a
Okay.
few more episodes where they basically like changed out the whole cast and did a bunch of like reworks to the show and basically like reused footage from the older episodes for all the flying stuff. So like I would say definitely stop with season three
Yeah. Yeah.
because the kind of quality level kind of takes a nosedive after that. But yeah, those first three seasons pretty good, pretty entertaining, I would say.
The pilot was Jan Michael Vincent, right?
Yeah, that was the pilot, and then his sort of like surrogate father, you know, co-pilot, mentor, buddy. He was kind of like wearing a lot of different hats in that show.
Yeah.
Was Ernest Borgnine played
That's
the
right.
sort of sidekick, you know,
Yeah.
character on there, which I always thought like their relationship was kind of fun, you know, because they kind
Yeah.
of had like this whole we're buddies, but he's also kind of acting as like his dad in a lot of ways, kind of looking out for him and stuff like that. And then there's like all this like kind of interesting like interpersonal drama between them, like that evolves like as the show goes on. uh it was kind of a weird thing, right? Because in the beginning of the show it was very much focused on like the espionage stuff and the like the technical aspects of it and like going on missions and stuff like that. And then like more and more as the show went on, they kind of tried to branch it out and make it more like broadly appealing. So they got into some zany stuff, like especially in those later seasons where they're like ending up at a Wild West show and all this other crazy stuff. But yet, no matter what problem ensues, it can always be solved with an attack helicopter.
There you go. Get yours today.
Yeah. Yeah, good times. I was wondering how long it would take me, how many episodes it would be before I could find a way to talk about Airwolf on the show. So seven
there you
for
go.
anyone who was wondering. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, speaking of other guilty pleasures that I know you have indulged in. Oops. I lost my earpiece. Help, Airwolf, help. Speaking of other guilty pleasures that I know you've indulged in, this was one I was a little bit surprised when you told me about. Why don't you tell the people what you do sometimes?
Well, I like to go for virtual walks in different cities around the world. I found it actually by accident. It was during the winter when our roads were really bad and I couldn't go out for walks or a jog or anything. And I found these you could videos on YouTube that you could do running. So you just put a scene and go, I'm going to run around the Colosseum in Rome. And these runners put like a GoPro on their head and they would do a run their track. So I would sort of just sit in the basement and run in place, just anything to get some exercise during the long winter months. And I was playing around with that, and I said, well, there must be other things. You could go walk or other stuff. And then I found there's like this whole, you can drive through cities or you can like walk through cities and you can pick any city. So you don't even have to spend money to go traveling. You just put on one of these YouTube videos and you can go to, somewhere in China. You can go there was a Moscow one where they're just walking around all around Red Square. Geneva, Switzerland, London, England, uh, Ottawa, Canada.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and and there's so many different versions too because there was ones where you could go through start checking out ghettos, not saying any specific cities, but there was like I tried to look through like ghettos in like New York City, Detroit, Chicago, and there it's just some places that we don't really see up here in Canada. And it was just like whole streets just boarded up, but people seem to be living in them anyways. People on the stoops and stuff, and it was you can do a tour of like almost anything because someone's out there videotaping them, and they get very addictive. Sounds when I'm describing it, it sounds stupid. Like, why would I watch that? But it just, you can see. I remember going through, I think it was Savannah, Georgia, and I was like, this is such a gorgeous looking place, And once again, so foreign to what we have here. They have the moss. I don't know what they call them, on the trees and all these
creeping
big
moss and kudzu and all that. Yeah.
And they have the big fountains and these like squares, and I just like, wow, it just mesmerized by these places. So yeah, it's fun. Even if you don't want to do a virtual walk or get any exercise, you can sit on the couch and take a walk through New York City. Don't fight the crowds. Watch it on YouTube.
Nice. Well, as soon as you told me about that, it reminded me of something that I've definitely gotten sucked into on YouTube, which is the whole extreme tourism thing, right? Where like
Yeah,
people go out and go to places that no sane person would typically go to on vacation.
yeah,
Like there's this fella I've watched on there several times called Bald and Bankrupt, and he's sort of famous for having gone to places like Ukraine and like the irradiated zone at Chernobyl and stuff like that, like before they kind of became hotbeds.
yeah,
And yeah, watching those videos it's like hard to look away almost, because like you're seeing something that's so, like you say, foreign to your own experience and your own lifestyle, or like what's common in your sort of neck of the woods,
right.
that I can definitely see how those things become super addictive and like kind of like a guilty pleasure for a lot of people, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, I just want to indulge in this thing that's like completely alien to my normal life experience.
Yeah,
So
it's almost
those things are kind of
educational in a
cool.
way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously you're seeing everything through the lens of the person filming the video, so there's going to be some sort of bias there, one way or the other.
Yeah,
It's because that's the thing with a lot of YouTubers, right? Is they're not necessarily trying to be objective in how they portray things, like they portray them in the way that they want to.
yeah,
And so, like, that's something I kind of always try to keep in mind when watching stuff like that, is that, like, this isn't like a documentary necessarily, right? Or some kind of like, hardcore journalistic effort or whatever. This is like just somebody's perspective on things based on their own personal life experience or biases or whatever. But it is interesting content nonetheless. Like I definitely get sucked into that sort of stuff all the time myself.
that's fun.
Yeah.
Harmless
Yeah.
fun. Lots of
Yeah.
worse things to be watching.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Speaking of which, I don't know if I want to punish you or not for making me watch this video. But you had something music related that you were a fan of, but it's rather long. Uh, I don't know if I'm actually going to make it through the entirety of the video, but I did think it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, actually, I guess it's very my early days of before I had virtual walks. This was like probably one of the earliest versions. When I first moved to Toronto, when I was a young man, there was this show that was on, and it came on like late at night because they had the channels that were like 24 hours. So you'd have your normal shows, and then instead of just turning the TV off, which is what used to happen, they would play this, and it was called
Mhm.
Night Walk, and they would play this smooth jazz throughout. So this guy had this big camera on his shoulder. It wasn't the GoPros like they had, and he would just walk down the streets of Toronto. And of course, to me, that was really cool because Toronto was an exciting town, compared to I grew up. And it sort of for music, it was my introduction to jazz and smooth jazz. So it
Mhm.
became sort of a guilty pleasure because I know a lot of people really diss on smooth jazz, but that's where I got my liking for smooth jazz was during watching that hours and hours of night walk of just watching some guy walk around Toronto with a
Yeah.
camera with this
Yeah.
smooth jazz playing in the background. So
Yeah, I think it's funny, right? Because like I'm a fan of smooth jazz as well, but I also feel like it part of the bad rap for it seems to come from like the visuals that tend to get associated with it, right? Because you
yeah,
see certain people dressed in a certain way doing certain things when smooth jazz is playing, and that has a tendency to kind of make people associate certain things and certain behaviors with it. Whereas if you're
yeah,
just listening to the music, you can kind of separate it from all of those stigmas or all those preconceptions or whatever. And I think it's a lot easier to kind of embrace it and get on board with it. But like music's a funny thing that way, right? Because I feel like a lot of times people's perception of it gets, especially since like the dawn of music video and all that stuff, like a lot of people's perceptions of music get skewed by the visuals that are associated with it.
So I'm a smooth jazz fan. So there.
Yeah. What of it?
That's it. That's it.
Well, I mean, I can't really throw any shade at all because I'm about to tell you about how much of a fan of Sugar Ray I am. So I'll tell you a little story about Sugar Ray, which might make a little bit more sense.
Make the
Um,
sugar go down easier.
yeah, nice. So I would not try to argue that they are in fact like some quintessential epic amazing band, but they do have a lot of really catchy songs and a lot of like fun songs, but they also have the good fortune, I guess you would say in my case, of being associated with a particular life event, which I think is another reason that songs and things can become guilty pleasures for people. And
Yeah.
in my case, like I have this very clear, like distinct recollection of like being on my way to like my college graduation ceremony and driving down into Pittsburgh to go and attend the ceremony and hearing the song every morning playing on the radio as we were like kind of driving into town.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, just like every moment of that experience is kind of like ingrained into my brain and almost as if it was soundtracked to the audio of that song,
Yeah.
so much so that like every time I hear that song I can literally just stop and close my eyes and it's almost like a film playing in my head where I can see
Yeah.
like every detail and every like memory of that experience of like coming into the city and like seeing the area where the graduation ceremony was taking place and like how it was
Yeah.
all decked out and everything and all the people who were there and where they were as we were driving by them and stuff like that. And it was like it's one of those weird mental sort of imprints that had to the point where like I don't think I could ever extract that memory from my brain or like extricate it from that association with that song if I
Yeah.
tried. Right. Like
Yeah.
probably like on my deathbed,
Yeah.
I'll be like laying there, like not able to think or remember anything else. And that stupid song is going to pop into my head. And I'm going to be like,
Yeah.
yeah, cool.
Well, it's funny because it really the music does ingrain in your head and attaches to a memory because there's so many songs that when that song goes on, it's like right away it's the one thought. It's
Mm-hmm.
like this is where that song's from. This is where that song's from. It's like a playlist of your life, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's very normal.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun too because especially with things like the radio, right, where like stuff comes on unexpectedly, and it's not
Yeah.
like you picked it, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes you end up hearing a song that's very incongruous with what's actually happening around you, and sometimes those are the strongest associations that get made,
Yeah.
which is kind of, I guess, what happened in the case of that Sugar Ray song, but fortunately I happen to be a fan of their stuff, so like that being like baked into my brain doesn't hurt me too much.
Yeah.
It would have sucked if it would have been a band I really hated or a song I really couldn't stand.
Yeah. Are they still around?
I honestly don't know what's up with them because like I kind of got on board with them like right around like the peak of their popularity, so like
Okay.
albums like 1459 and their like self-titled third album, stuff like that. It's like kind of like where I was really super into them, and I
Yeah.
really haven't paid too much attention to them since then. I'm sure they've put stuff out. I'm just not really all that up on it.
Yeah.
But like for sure there's like two or three Sugar Ray albums that I have like a deep probably unhealthy obsession with,
Yeah.
for sure.
Hmm. Interesting. I'll have to
uh
go onto Spotify and look up Sugar Ray and see some of their other songs.
yeah,
I know a couple
I'd
of their
be
hits, but
I'd be curious. Well, they've had quite a few hits, so
yeah.
like there's definitely at least probably like 5 or 10 songs that you would probably recognize even if you didn't know it was them. uh but beyond that, they just had like a really good penchant for like writing and doing like really catchy songs, right? So like
Yeah.
even their songs that weren't big like radio hits tend to be pretty like earwormy.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, part of the thing that appealed to me about that kind of era of their stuff anyway. Because I mean, they started out as almost like a hardcore band. Like their
Okay.
original material was like completely different from what they ended up becoming famous for, which is
Okay.
is I guess another reason why I kind of like them, because I always think it's interesting when bands go through like a big metamorphosis like that. Because like their old stuff, you wouldn't even recognize them as being the same band, I don't think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty wild, some of it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's a good times
I'll check them out
if you dare.
if I dare. Yeah.
I won't take any responsibility for what may happen as a result of that, other than the fact that I seem to be doing all right. But I know you've got some love for some more like deep cut type stuff, music wise.
Yeah. Well, for me, well, I've been a Styx fan since the beginning, but
Mm-hmm.
one song that I mean, everyone throws out so many hits that they have, but for me, one of my guilty pleasures uh, is their song "The Lord of the Rings,"
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's from their Pieces of Eight album, and it's like Young Guns. It's like a raw, and it's a perfect song for them because they've got the high voices.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an anthem, and I wish I could sing it because right now just thinking about it, it's like I just want to belt it
Get your
out,
blood pumping.
but I'm not going to belt it out because I just embarrass myself. But
That's all right.
yeah, the Lord of the Rings. It was I love that song. I mean, I love all their classics and all their other songs, but Lord of the Rings is just one guilty pleasure where I can I just in the privacy of my own room, I'd be more than happy to sing along.
Crank it up, give it a
That's
couple
it.
notches on the old
Yeah,
dial. Yeah,
yeah.
nice,
All hail for the Lord of the Rings.
nice,
Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Boom, boom. And just yeah.
nice. I
It's
can dig it.
yeah,
I'm on board with that.
yeah. So everyone should check out Lord of the Rings, Pieces of Eight by Styx.
There you
Make it
go.
your guilty pleasure.
Ooh, nice.
And I have
All right.
some, or I know you're about to say something to really embarrass yourself now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks for prefacing that accordingly,
Yeah.
because I'm about to walk into a big old bear trap here. Because I think another aspect of the whole guilty pleasures thing that I think we haven't really touched on yet is when your guilty pleasure sort of conflicts with other people's guilty pleasure. So I'm going to talk about something that is, I think, probably less of a hot button issue nowadays than it used to be. But at a certain point in time, this would have been fighting words, I think, for a lot of people. But we're going to talk for a minute about Van Halen. And yeah, you guessed it. We're about to have the Sammy Hagar versus David Lee Roth discussion. And those of you who know me and know how I typically come down on things are probably not going to be surprised to find out that I am in camp Sammy Hagar. Uh,
And
and I am not going to be surprised to find out that you are
I'm,
not.
yeah. Well, I like Sammy Hagar. I
Yeah.
mean, the songs with Van Halen were good. He had some, I mean, actually some great songs with them.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I mean, David Lee Roth is always going to be the vocalist for there. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when the first album came out and I heard it, and it was just like, wow, it was so new. It was different. It was that whole sort of like LA metal sound that became very
Mm-hmm.
big, afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and Eddie's guitar playing. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he uh David Lee Roth was was the ultimate showman.
I'll give you that for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and his voice was very, it was different, very uh, can't think of the word, but it really
Iconic.
stood out.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a David Lee Roth hater by any means. I know some people come down like real hard on one side of the fence or the other. I enjoy both.
Yeah.
But I would say, I think, not dissimilarly from our Rush conversation last episode, I think a lot of my love for like the Van Hagar era comes from the fact of like the age I was at the time that all that stuff
Yeah.
was occurring, right? Because like when 5150 and OU 812 and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, which we all know what that actually means, all those albums dropped, and even like into like Balance, like all four of those like Van Hagar albums, like that was like prime time, right? Like I was super into music at the time, super feeling it, and it's like, 1984, that was one of my first albums that I actually got. So
Yeah.
I loved, Panama and Jump and Hot for Teacher and all that stuff. That was a great album too. But I was kind of catching David Lee Roth on the tail end of things, right? So
Yeah.
like he was there, he was like a big deal for me, but it,
Yeah.
but it was like really when Van Halen hit for me was like right after that. And so
Yeah.
I was like, man, I heard 5150 for the first time and I'm like, damn, this is a really good album. So I think with a lot of things, like timing is everything, right? It's all
Yeah.
like when you encounter stuff or what you encounter first. I think
Yeah.
sometimes that makes like a bigger impression on you, because like a lot of that older Van Halen stuff I kind of came to later, right? Like I kind of like discovered it more like after the fact, and so like it didn't resonate with me or have the same impact for me as like a lot of the stuff that I was kind of discovering as it occurred.
Yeah. No, I
So I
hear
think
you.
that probably has a lot to do with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely dig them both. But like I always have like a soft spot for Sammy because I always felt like he got a little bit dissed in that situation. And I
What
mean,
was
not that,
hard
yeah,
to walk in David Lee Roth's shoes after that?
yeah, like that was definitely a tough act to follow. So I
Yeah.
always felt it was like, I don't know, it was just cool that he was able to step into that and do as well as he did
Yeah.
with it.
Kudos to
And
him.
I will say this: I think we can both agree nothing good came of Van Halen
And
after that, right? Like
yeah.
I can't think of too many Van Halen songs or albums that would do much for me after Sammy. So I think if nothing else, those two are kind of on their own level compared to what
Yeah.
came after them.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I heard "Running with the Devil" the first time, I was just like, "Wow!"
Hmm.
Yeah. So it was like you said, you heard
Yeah,
it, and it was in a certain place, and I know exactly where I heard it for the first time, and that was a long time ago, but
yeah.
I
There you go.
still remember. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the thing, it's like when you first heard it, when you heard
Hmm.
it, like what is it, how's it, you know, what's it
How's it
attached
associated
to?
to your life
Yeah,
experience? Yeah,
yeah,
for sure, for sure,
yeah. So
no doubt about
so well, we
that.
didn't come to blows over it, so we both
Well, that's good.
agree to
That's good.
disagree, but agree
Yeah.
still. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. As is our way. As is
Yes.
our way.
So Van Halen in the whole, thumbs up to them then.
Yes. Thumbs up to everyone,
All right.
except that dude from Extreme, because I really didn't like that stuff. But anyway, moving on. Now we're gonna get hate mail from the guys who like that. But anyway, good times.
Actually, before we go on, I just have a quick question.
Hmm.
I think it was the last episode, but you had over your left shoulder, you had a question mark.
Oh,
And I
yes.
noticed there's like a 500 now.
Yes. Yes. So thank you for bringing that up.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, good times. So yeah, I clearly didn't offend you too much because you're still helping me plug my books, so that's great. So yeah, as promised in the last episode, here we have the cover for my upcoming novel, 500, which is sort of like a sequel to this guy over here. 309, which was my second novel back in 2018. And it, in much the same way that previous books that I've done kind of relate to each other despite being standalones. So I kind of do this thing where all my books take place in like a shared, interconnected universe, but also sort of tell their own individual standalone stories.
Right.
And so that's kind of what's going on here, where like these two books are very much related to one another, but also kind of tell their own story and do their own thing. So obviously, this one here won't be out for a few more months. I'm kind of targeting like a early summer, late spring release for it. But this one here, you can go read right now if you wanted to, maybe perhaps in preparation. And that's all I'll say about that.
There you go.
But yeah, thanks for that opportunity.
No problem.
And folks can let me know what they think about that new cover and what they think it might signify or stand for. I'd be curious to know what people think what might be going on there. So yeah, good times.
Hopefully I didn't throw you off.
No, good times. Well, I was going to say we could almost make a game of that.
Oh,
Almost
Mr. Segway.
Almost like a video game. I know you had a video game that you consider to be a guilty pleasure, which I would think would be pretty fun for people to hear about.
Yep. Well, mine is Sid Meier's Gettysburg. And it's sort of a turn-based. That's the word. It's a turn-based game. I don't know if it's for everyone. It's you need patience and stuff. It's but if you're a fan of military or Civil War stuff, specifically the Battle of Gettysburg, which I know there's lots of people that are, well, not, I should say, like, fans of the battle, but
Yeah.
historical wise,
Sure.
It was such an engaging game where you have to you pick a side and you're playing against AI, and you move your troops, and they're all in divisions. So you have them spread out everywhere, and you have to move them so they're together, or you can have them way out, scouting. And then once you've moved your people into position, then you have to set up your armaments. So you have your cannons or your rifles. But if you want to have your people rifle, then they can't march. All they can do is shoot. So if you want them to be marching soon, then you have to have them everything unlimbered kind of thing. And then once you've done it, because it's turn-based, then the other side has a chance to rebuttal, and so when you shoot, then they shoot back. So when you move, they move. It's like chess, you move one player, they move. And that's what it is. So you move your people, they move their people in response. And then you set up your armaments, they set up their armaments. Then you fire, then they fire. And so you see your people, you've got like 1,000 people in this division, and I just see them going 999, 998, and then it's like, I didn't put them in the right spot. They're getting massacred, as the numbers keep going down.
Yeah.
And and then the thing that made it cool is because I've been to Gettysburg several times, and the map is based on exactly the places that the actual battle took place. So you can actually, it's so well documented, the battle itself, that you try different things to go, well, I wonder if I could have altered the battle. If they had have gone the first day, instead of going there, had to hit the round tops and got the high ground instead of worrying about going through the city, what would that have happened? You can try all sorts of different strategies. And I guess it's just fun that it was based on, a real thing, and as close as you can, I guess, get to, reliving such a iconic battle.
Yeah.
And you can play either for the Union side or the Confederate side. So
yeah,
if it's hours and hours. I could actually probably go days and days
Yeah.
accumulated of time spent playing that game.
Well, it's really funny, right? Because like Sid Meier obviously is sort of a legend in the video game industry, especially when it
Yeah,
comes to these like turn-based strategy games. Things like Civilization and Alpha Centauri and all these like big epic classic games that he's been involved in. Things like XCOM. It goes on and on. And it's funny, like I've played so many of his games, but Gettysburg is one of the few that I actually haven't played. And just listening to you talk about it, it makes me feel like, oh man, I really am bummed out. I missed out on that one because that'd probably be a tricky one to track down at this point. Like I know there's
yeah,
some modern Gettysburg games that are out there, which I can't really
yeah.
speak to the quality of, but I know that Sid Meier one was very like revered and
Yeah.
well thought of. So yeah, it's a shame I missed out on that one, but hopefully at some point there'll be a remake or a remaster or something like that, or maybe Good Old Games will get a hold of it. We'll get a chance to play it again. But
Yeah, blow some new life into it. Well, as you
yeah,
said, I mean, there are other Gettysburg. I played a few of them, and the graphics are much better now, of course.
yeah, yeah.
And the transition of the movement's a lot smoother. And
Hmm.
but yeah,
There's
the
something
old
to be said
days.
for those classics, though. Like a lot of those
Yeah,
classic strategy games were so dialed in, from a
yeah,
mechanical standpoint that sometimes it's ironic because you'll have a newer game that, like you say, the graphics look better, but they maybe aren't as well engineered as some of those
yeah,
classic games were. So sometimes it's a bit of a trade-off. I unfortunately just don't know enough about the newer ones to say how good or bad they are, but
yeah.
might be something worth exploring.
It's funny. Well, the old ones you have, when you're moving your turn, and then they're moving, and then when there's the loading area, what they used to do is they'd throw up like a video, like a video of like reenactors shooting and stuff to keep your mind off the fact that it was loading. Because back in
Yeah,
that,
nice,
the loading was so long sometimes.
nice.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I
funny.
guess that trick only works so many times, right? Like until you like I guess the first time you see it, it's like, oh cool, a video.
Yeah.
And then like after
Yeah.
the 50th time, you're like, man,
Yeah.
this video is long.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yes, sir. What about you? Do you have your guilty pleasure?
Yeah, well, like I just can't call it an episode unless I've angered at least a few dozen people with some of my ideas. So like I'm gonna throw this one out there, which I know is gonna infuriate some people, but I'm gonna do it anyway, which is Metal Gear Survive, which is the game that got made by Konami after they fired Hideo Kojima after he created the masterpiece that is Metal Gear Solid 5. They went ahead and made a survival game based loosely, very loosely, on the events of Metal Gear Solid 5 and the engine and the mechanics and the premise of that game, but kind of wrapped in the context of a survival horror kind of wrapping. And that game takes an awful lot of heat in the gaming community, and probably for some pretty valid reasons. Um, but at the same time, I found it to be like a very compelling and engaging and satisfying gameplay experience, especially having played a bunch of like the cooperative aspects of it with friends, because basically there's like a single player base building story sort of aspect to the game that takes about like 30 or 40 hours to complete. And throughout the process of that, it's kind of training you and teaching you how to play the cooperative multiplayer mode. So if
Yeah.
you happen to be playing that game as I did with a bunch of friends who are also playing it, and then you can kind of jump in and do the cooperative stuff with them as you're progressing through the storyline. I think it's a really kind of satisfying, unique, underrated experience that a lot of people either like willfully or just through like not being exposed to it didn't get the chance to experience. But yeah, that game I think is way better than people give it credit for being, is I guess the main thing I'd say about it.
Well, I can't say one thing because I'm ashamed to say, considering I'm such a big Metal Gear fan. I have never played Survive. And it had nothing to do with boycotting that they, had moved on. But I just never got it around to doing that one.
Yeah, I would definitely highly recommend it, especially knowing you being like a survival horror gameplay fan. Like, I think you would really appreciate some of the stuff that's done there, yeah, with regard to that, because there's some genuinely creepy stuff in that game and some genuinely cool like survival stuff in that game, which I think it's again some of the stuff that tends to get overlooked when people just sort of focus on the things that they criticize about it. Like, I think they tend to overlook like a lot of the good things that it does.
Yeah, I'll have to
um
take a look.
yeah. I think the other problem that that game ran into is that it was never actually a full priced game. So I think even when it was a
Uh,
brand new game and it just came out, it was priced at like $40 rather than the typical 60. But I think a lot of people judged it as if it was a $60 game, and that is kind of where it ran into a lot of problems, because it definitely doesn't have like the content or the breadth or depth or scope of like a typical Metal Gear game. And I think that's another area where like having the Metal Gear name on it probably hurt
yeah.
it, because it kind of set people's expectations in a certain way. Whereas I think if you had just played that game and it had been called something else, a lot of people would have, clicked with it more.
All
So
right.
that's another thing I would say about that one. But
Was Snake in it, or was it a whole new character base? Or
yeah, so you actually make your character, because the whole idea
okay,
is, at the beginning of uh not Phantom Pain, because that's what Metal Gear Solid 5 is actually called, but there's the whole prelude to Phantom Pain, Ground Zeroes. At the beginning of
okay,
Ground Zeroes, when they have the whole like attack on Mother Base and a bunch of his people seemingly get killed in that attack. A bunch of old Snake, Solid Snakes, soldiers basically
yeah,
disappear. Well, the whole premise of Metal Gear Survive is that those people actually didn't get killed; they got transported to another dimension. And so you're playing as a character who you make, who's one of those soldiers who got sent to that other dimension. And then the whole premise of the game is you're trying to figure out a way to get back, to your own world and your own like version of reality and Mother Base and all that, so you can rejoin up with Snake and all the stuff that he's doing in Metal Gear Solid 5. So that's kind of the conceit or the idea of that game, which I guess is another thing that people say they didn't like about it, but I actually thought was kind of cool.
yeah.
So
Do they have the
your
same
mileage may
sneak
vary on that one.
mechanism and stuff? Do you still like the stealth modes and
Yeah,
stuff?
like all of the mechanics
It's
from
the
Metal Gear
same.
Solid 5 are basically present there,
Okay.
plus a bunch of extra stuff that they did specifically for that game, right? So there's like um, kind of like a tower defense sort of mini game in that,
Yeah.
where like you set up defenses and have to like protect an area from like the creatures and stuff that are attacking it. And so you're
Yeah.
like building fences and gun emplacements and stuff like that, so that you can
Hmm.
use them to fight off the creatures that are assaulting the thing you're trying to protect. And so they have all these extra mechanics on top of all the stuff that was in MGS5, which are kind of cool. There's a
Yeah.
lot of cool like gadgets and weapons and stuff like that as well. But yeah, I think that that's a really strange game, Metal Gear Survive, because like
Yeah.
in some ways it greatly benefits from the association with Metal Gear Solid, and in some ways it was very much hurt by that association. So I think like
Yeah.
there's kind of a lot of give and take there in a lot of different ways.
Hmm. I'll have to get
But
on the YouTube, check some videos out and see how it looks. See some
yeah,
gameplay.
nice, nice. Maybe I'll
Hmm.
get it for you for Christmas.
And there you go. There you go.
Well, speaking of which, I think our gift to you is that we've given you a lot of cool ideas for things you might want to check out as your own potential guilty pleasures. We'd, of course, love to hear about yours. If you'd like to drop some of those in the comment section down below and help stoke the old YouTube algorithm for us.
There you go.
But that's going to bring us to the end of this quirky little episode. But we will be back next time with something a little more traditional for you as we move deeper into the year.
Thanks for coming by. Share your guilty pleasures, and we'll see you next time. Happy Valentine's Day.
Ciao. Congratulations. You just survived the post-mortem report. For more information about the show, the hosts, or the things they talked about, check out our super swanky information page at anchor.fm/postmortemreport. Until next time, always remember, good posts never die. Wow. We actually got through that.
Could you imagine if we hadn't said, we're not doing it?
Yeah.
The internet lords would have been going, suckers, this was the time you would have gotten through.
Yep. Nobody is more shocked than me that just worked. All right. Stopping the recording.